Good morning and welcome into the second episode of Crown Score Podcast. Alongside my co-host virtually, Reggie Walker, I am Kevin Stewart. The third member of our team, John Ellis, he's sidelined this week with a stomach bug. We wish him well. Hope to see him back next week. Reg, I didn't get to see much of the Hornets game last night. I got to see the second half. I was driving back from Tampa. Felt like the Hornets had that game in the third quarter, but then the fourth quarter happened and it all went downhill. A 26-3 run and losing Gordon Hayward for a potentially extended period of time. We don't know the extent of the injury yet. But if he misses some time, how bad does that hurt the Hornets?
I think it impacts them in this way. Look, the injury is one thing, but I think what we saw last night with this basketball team is they saw one of their leaders go down. And anytime I think you see a leader go down, it can get to your psyche a little bit. Let's not forget, this is still a young team. I believe 7 players, 25 or under on this roster. You see the older guy and Gordon Hayward go down. In terms of a scoring punch, you lose that. You lose a little bit of that leadership as well. And then also, look, let's call it what it is. The Utah Jazz, one of the best teams in the league, up there in that 1, 2, 3 area for top record in the league. So it's not that they lost to a bad basketball team. They also lost on the road to a really good basketball team in Utah. And at the end of the day, part of it also is you look at Utah and the way they're constructed is what the Hornets are trying to create, right? The Utah backcourt with Mike Conley, a guy who's had all kinds of accomplishments in this league, along with Donovan Mitchell. The Hornets are trying to create similar things, whether it's going to be Devontae long-term or Terry long-term. And then obviously LaMelo Ball, they're trying to create those same things. You got a wing player in Gordon Hayward. Again, we talked about losing him last night. So I think that was more of a psyche thing for this basketball team in losing one of their leaders in a big game on the road. And maybe they just didn't respond well to it. But again, that's going to happen when you have so many young players.
Well, I wanted to get that out of the way because this week's topic is going to be, again, the Carolina Panthers. We're going to talk about them a lot. There's been a lot of turnover since last week. Trey Boston, Stephen Weatherly, Michael Pilardi, and last but not least, K1 Short, all cut to make cap room. Joe Person did tweet this week that he heard K1 on radio this week, and the Panthers have indicated that they would like to bring him back, which I think that would be a good marriage. I don't think he's going to get nearly as much as he was slated to make in 2021. He does carry an $11 million in dead cap with that release. Matt Paradis, they've restructured his contract to free up a bunch of cap space. They're going into next season with about $40 million in cap space as we speak at this moment, with the biggest cap hits being Teddy Bridgewater at about $23 million. Shaq Thompson at 14, Christian McCaffrey 12.5, and Robbie Anderson at 12. And for those wondering, to create that cap space for Deshaun Watson, his hit is $16 million next year before jumping to a whopping 40 in 2022. Some of those numbers will offset if Deshaun is brought into town, and Teddy's obviously going to be part of the trade package. But our topic this week is if you have that money, and if the roster is going into next season as constructed right now, saying Teddy is the quarterback, the 2 biggest free agents on the roster, Taylor Moton and Curtis Samuel, who would you bring back and why?
Taylor Moton. I mean, that's easy for me. And here's why. First of all, let me say this. The caveat there is I'm an organization that feels like, in addition to the amount of money that's already tied up in him, I'm an organization that feels like Christian McCaffrey can come back healthy in 2021. That's part and parcel number one. If that's the case, Curtis Samuel became what he became this year because Christian was not there. He caught a lot of passes out of the backfield. He played in the backfield at times, all those things because of Christian McCaffrey. Now, to that point, why was Christian McCaffrey out? Well, injuries. And we could say part and parcel of that, which is also why you have Teddy Bridgewater right now, is injuries. And why is that? Because the offensive line has been less than average for a number of years.
That's a nice way to put it. It's a polite way to put it.
It's a polite way to put it. And that's the reason that Cam Newton's no longer here. Okay. That's the reason that Christian McCaffrey's been dinged up. That's the reason that Teddy Bridgewater, look, you don't have to love Teddy, but I would ask anybody, as much as you don't like Teddy, tell me with a straight face, he wouldn't have played better with a better offensive line.
I think there's no doubt.
There's no doubt. And so you add all that up, the answer has to be offensive line. And then let me add this caveat. We talked about this on the first episode of Crown Score. We saw the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes looked less than average for portions of the game because that offensive line was not playing well. So if you're Carolina, you've got to fix the offensive line. And I think it starts with keeping one of your own guys in Taylor Moton and understanding that you can plug him in, whether it's at right tackle, whether you decide to maybe try him at left tackle, put him at guard, wherever you want to put him. At the end of the day, that's the best offensive lineman the Carolina Panthers had in 2020, and they need to find a way to get him back to 2021.
And just to go back to the Super Bowl, and I don't mean to talk about the Chiefs all the time, but I think the Chiefs were in that game for so long because Mahomes has superhuman ability. I mean, he made some of these throws, parallel to the ground, 30 yards down the field, and made it interesting. Teddy Bridgewater doesn't have that kind of athleticism. And I don't think many people do. That's no fault of Teddy. That's just the Chiefs were in that game because Mahomes is out of his mind.
That dude's built different.
But if you look at Taylor Moton's 4-year career, he has not missed a game. There's been so much in and out, interchanging with the line over the last few years just because of injury. I mean, look at Russell Okung this year. He missed a bunch of the season. Who's the left tackle? Greg Little was a healthy scratch for so long before they put him on IR. And Matt Paradis is the other constant, and they've restructured his contract, so obviously he'll be back. But you go into next season, unrestricted free agents on the offensive line right now: Russell Okung, John Miller, Chris Reed, Michael Schofield, and Trent Larson. That's 5 guys. And Trent Scott's restricted. I think Taylor Moton is imperative to bring back.
Well, here's the other thing to remember. Most teams carry 8, maybe 9 offensive linemen. No one carries 10 offensive linemen. So you're talking about a team with more than 5 offensive linemen that chances are they will not be back this year. And your best one, you got to find a way to keep. That's why I think you got to find a way to keep Taylor Moton here. The other thing about, the Taylor Moton piece of it is he's played both sides. His versatility along that line helps you as well. And so I think you have to look at that and you have to understand, I don't care who, or let me rephrase, I don't give a damn who your investment is at quarterback. You better protect it first and foremost, because if not, it is not going to matter. And look, we realize that, injuries in the game happen. And I understand that. And that's why you have to have a bunch of young offensive linemen that are ready to step in different spots. So I think the draft is going to be imperative to find some other guys that can step in over the long term in spots and or become starters for this organization. But I think if you've got a guy that is a bona fide starter in this league on the offensive line who continues to check the box in the number one category of ability, which is availability, you have to bring that guy back.
I think especially since he's familiar with the system too, that'll
Absolutely
help, because there could be 3 new guys on this line next year, potentially 4 if you don't bring Moton back. And I think that's really key, because they haven't had a chance to build any cohesion on this line, which I think is imperative. I mean, I go back to the 2007 Giants, which, because I'm from New York, but they played together for the whole season. And it was obvious that they learned from each other and they played together as a physical unit.
I'm going to use your team as an example. I'm glad you brought that up. So let me ask you this. When Eli Manning got ready to retire, I was of the belief that Eli wasn't the problem. The offensive line was the problem. Then they go get Saquon Barkley. He keeps getting hurt. Then they get Daniel Jones. He's getting beat up, and he's also running for his life, who's much more mobile than Eli Manning, and he's getting sacked damn near just as often. Message, offensive line still has not been fixed.
It should be.
Am I the only one that's missing that?
No, you're not. Because, I mean, Eli was made of stone. I mean, he didn't miss a game due to injury in his whole career at quarterback. That doesn't happen. Jones has already missed significant time. So that's why, another reason why I think offensive line is key. And I like Curtis Samuel a lot. He's a Brooklyn guy. I'm from the Bronx, so I'm partial to him. But as you said to earlier, he really stepped up this year. I think Joe Brady's offense was really beneficial for him, but he really exploded onto the scene in many different ways because McCaffrey missed time. And if McCaffrey comes back healthy, I think you can get away with losing Curtis Samuel and maybe going after a larger possession receiver, either mid-round in the draft or lesser money on the free agent side.
Well, absolutely. And here's the other thing that you have to understand. Yeah, you can turn around and pay Curtis Samuel right now all you want, but then you're going to have to ask yourself, what do I do with DJ Moore? And I'm going to tell you right now, if it's my choice, I'm paying DJ Moore and I'm paying Robbie Anderson again before I'm paying Curtis Samuel.
I agree with you.
And you can just call me an idiot if you want to, but the reality of the situation is those two guys are bona fide big play receivers in the National Football League. And Curtis Samuel is a guy that you just create opportunities to get the ball in his hands, just like you already have in 22.
Yeah, I think Curtis is going to find a new home this offseason. That's just my hunch. And wherever he goes, he's going to be an impact player because that's just the kind of player he is.
The only thing you hope is he doesn't stay in the division. That's what you pray for. You got to hope that guy does not end up in this division, because yes, it can come back to haunt you. But at the same point in time, again, if Christian McCaffrey is healthy in 2021, then I think you're fine with that. Now, I say all that to say, and this is no knock on Christian McCaffrey. He's been in the league now 4 years. Of a possible 64 games, he's only played 45. So you have to look at that as an organization. Now, the majority of those this year, but as a rookie, he only played in 10 of the possible 16 games as well. Then he had two seasons consecutive where he played in every game. And then this year, obviously, only the 3 games. So I'm not calling him injury prone, and I'm not suggesting that he is. But he's also a running back going into the 5th year of his career, which we know that magic number at running back is 5. Going into the 5th year of his career with a big cap number that's also coming off an injury. I think you owe it to him and the organization to try to let him play through that contract and prove that you aren't, quote, wrong in giving him that deal. But I think if you re-sign Curtis Samuel and you keep 22, a.k.a. Christian McCaffrey, you're putting yourself in a spot to where now all of a sudden, I'll say it this way, then what are you going to tell me? You're going to take Christian off the field to give Curtis those opportunities? Because if that's the case, I would argue that that's the same concept that I was screaming all of last year, especially early in the season, with using Mike Davis in the first and second quarters to try to beat up those defenses and let McCaffrey finish the game against defenses that are fatigued. So to me, you have to think about the narrative and the plan here as an organization and make sure it's a clear one and concise one. But at the end of the day, Christian McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel, 2 similar players. I don't think you need both of them.
But just to go to your point, if they were to move on from Christian McCaffrey, I would think Curtis would be back. But speaking of which, this whole thing is really blown up over the last week, just based off of what I think is a clickbait article. And one suggestion was trading Christian McCaffrey in that package for Deshaun. And something came out today on Good Morning Football from Peter Schrager, who I like a lot. I like the show a lot. I think all 4 of them on the show, Nate, Kay, Kyle, and Pete. It's a great show every morning. But when I saw the trade proposal Tuesday morning from Peter Schrager, Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, Brian Burns, Teddy Bridgewater, and a first rounder in 2021 and 2022, I thought that was a little steep.
That's a bad trade for both teams, to be honest. It is, because what happens is you bring Deshaun here and that cap number. You have stripped him of playmakers, right? Robbie's gone.
2 big-time playmakers.
Christian McCaffrey's gone. So you stripped him of playmakers. The offensive line is still bad. And so what did you really accomplish? And then you don't have the first-round picks to solve that problem over the next 2 years. Flip it the other way if you're the Texans. Why do I want McCaffrey's contract? If Teddy Bridgewater is so bad, that's what the Panther fans say, or some of them, many of them say, why would I want him? Okay. Christian McCaffrey, we talked about the injuries and all that stuff. Yeah, I get the 2 first-round picks, but I'm going to have to spend that on offensive line because my offensive line stinks anyway.
And
so
you're going to
I'm back at square one, and I'm giving up a generational quarterback for what? Essentially, the best thing I'm getting back in this deal is a young pass rusher in Brian Burns.
And I think he is going to be an elite pass rusher in this league. He
Agreed.
had a breakout campaign in 2020. He was all over the field. He was in the backfield in seconds on every snap. So when I saw that, and I don't like to give these offers any time of day because I have my offers, you have your offers, everyone's got their offers. There was a guy on Sirius XM today who said that Dallas should do a sign and trade of Dak and Zeke for Deshaun. It's like everybody's got their opinions, but what brought this one?
Let me stop you right there because I want to make this point, and I hate to do this because I know you're getting ready to make a hell of a point because you always do, but let me make this point, and I want people to really understand something. If you're a GM or if you're talking as your team's GM, and you think, for instance, right, the Cowboys made a mistake in giving Zeke Elliott that money, or the Panthers made a mistake in giving Christian McCaffrey that money. What the hell makes you think the other 31 GMs in the league don't think the same thing? That's where I get frustrated listening to people sometimes. I had someone say to me the other day, I can't believe the Panthers let go of KK Short without trading him and getting something back. And I go, let me ask you a question. Are you going to trade for a defensive tackle that had 2 consecutive years with shoulder surgeries, played 5 games out of the possible 32 over the last 2 years? Are you going to trade for him? And he goes, well, no. I go, then what the hell makes you think 31 other GMs would?
What would Carolina get back? A conditional 7th, maybe? Maybe
take the cap space. Take the cap space. Move on.
But what I don't understand about this trade offer is why would the Panthers want to put Brian Burns in a package right now? It's a young defense. You just released Trey Boston. Shaq Thompson is your defensive captain. Brian Burns is going to be another defensive captain. Why? It's a young defense. He's a proven leader. I mean, he was the most authentic post-game press conference in the league, I thought, last season. And he's in the backfield on every play. Why are you going to include this guy? That was my biggest red flag. I don't like giving up McCaffrey either, but Burns was, to me, it was the one that jumped off the page at me the most.
If I'm the Carolina Panthers, there's 3 guys on this defense that are untouchables in trade right now, especially in this Deshaun Watson deal. Brian Burns, I'm not moving him. I'm not moving Shaq because he's the guy that's making all the calls on my defense.
And I'm guessing Jeremy Chin.
Yeah, I ain't moving those 3. Period. Point blank. End of discussion. I ain't moving them. Because at the end of the day, defense wins championships. We saw it with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And right now, the Carolina Panthers have a guy on all 3 levels that is capable of putting up consecutive, consistent Pro Bowl season performances throughout the rest of the next 4 or 5 years. If you've got those 3 type of guys, one at each level, you've got a chance to win. You look at all the great defenses around the league, they've got a guy at each level that can make dominant plays on the football field, which allows them to be part of championship aspirations and make deep runs in the playoffs.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Bucs defense because Vita Vea was on the Pat McAfee show on Monday, and he was telling a story that practice squad players were coming up to him and other defensive players during the game and saying, we have not seen this defense all year. He said everything just clicked and they were playing out of their minds, and they were. I mean, it helped that the Chiefs had 2 reserve offensive linemen. And they were getting just smoked. But the defense in that game against a weak offensive line proved to be the much more dominant team.
And you know why? It's because there was you couldn't double team anybody. They were able to get home with 4 up front. When you've got Sue and Vea inside, the center and the 2 guards are occupied with those 2 guys. And so Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul, and you know Pierre-Paul really well, being a Giants fan. Jason Pierre-Paul, one-on-one against those tackles who normally are not starters, those 2 guys had a field day getting off the edge and making Patrick Mahomes uncomfortable in the pocket. Brian Burns is a guy that can get up the field and make people uncomfortable in the pocket. If the Panthers decide, and again, this is going to be contingent on what Phil Snow wants to do in terms of 4-down linemen or 3-down linemen. But if the Panthers decide to go with Yetur Gross-Matos, who will be a second-year player next year out of Penn State, the 2nd-round pick, look, he showed some signs of being able to come off the edge effectively, fairly consistently as well. So all of a sudden, you got 2 guys that can come off the edge. If they're able to bring K'Wan Short back and he can play inside with Derek Brown, and they can create some kind of a rotation, because I guarantee they'll have some other guys available in that mix, whether it's F.A. Obata, some of the other players that they've kind of had around this organization to rotate that defensive front. They've got a chance to be a really good defensive front in this league. I personally think they need to go back to 4-down because, look, Phil Snow, I love you, and I understand you're a 3-3-5 guy or 3-4 guy or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, there is no reason Brian Burns should ever be 9 yards deep down the field trying to cover anybody. That guy needs to be getting after the quarterback every single snap.
And if you have a guy on the edge like Brian Burns, he's going to get more attention. It's going to lead to the development of guys on the opposite side of that line, like Gross-Matos. I mean, look at Justin Tuck at OCU Manura when you had Michael Strahan on the other side of that line.
Absolutely right.
Look at Robert Mathis when you had Dwight Freeney on the other side of that line in Indianapolis. I mean, just having a guy like Burns is so valuable to the development of the rest of your defensive line.
I'm going to go back even further. I'll take it to two guys that are two really good friends of mine. Well, one really good friend of mine, another guy that I've had a chance to interact with and saw them together talking. Kevin Carter and Javon Curse. People forget at one point Kevin Carter played left defensive end, which meant he had to deal with right tackles, the physical guys running the football at him. At one point, Kevin played 335, 340 pounds. But he knew on the other side, he had Javon the Freak Curse. And Tennessee went all the way to a Super Bowl behind those two guys playing on the edges. So if you've got two guys that can play together and make life easier for each other, I think you've got to find a way to do that. And the Carolina Panthers, they certainly have one right now in Brian Burns. The question is, who can they put on the other side? I think right now, Gross Matos has a chance to show his wares.
I thought that was a good discussion.
That's what we do, man. We try to talk about things and we try to be fair.
Yeah.
We try to be balanced. We try to explain the premise of our conversation pieces, right? But the thing I think that, we can never forget as we have these conversations and as we talk sports in general is we can have pie in the sky, but what the one thing we have to always remember, and I tell this to anybody that I will chat with about sports, whatever you think you're smart enough to swindle another GM out of, he's smart enough to do the same thing to you. So you can't sit there and say, well, I'm going to trade this guy for a first round pick, knowing he's the last linebacker on my roster. What of the other 31 GMs are going to fall for that?
Dave Gettleman?
Zero. Well, and look, Gettleman's made some mistakes.
Gettleman traded a second and a third rounder for an upcoming unrestricted free agent Leonard Williams last year. I'm just frustrated.
Fair. No, it's fair. Look, now there are mistakes made. Mistakes have been made.
And Gettleman made some mistakes in Carolina too.
He did, but you know what? He also made some really good picks.
All right, let's get to our mailbag. We had one submission this week from a guy named COB, Twitter handle not fake C_OB.
This guy.
Reggie, his question is, with Matt Rule being the Panthers head coach and Urban Meyer now coming into the NFL, is the feeling different about college coaches entering the NFL compared to 20 years ago, say with Steve Spurrier, et cetera?
Yes and no. I think there's still a question of their ability to win, but I think more than anything, it's now about the ability to connect with players. It's about the ability to interact with those guys because the league is growing younger, right? We look at Tom Brady; he's an anomaly at 43 years old or whatever he is. Aaron Rodgers, people are ready to make him retire, and he's 36, right? Russell Wilson, some people say, oh, well, maybe it's time for him to, start thinking about retirement. So I think what it's about now is these college coaches coming into the league. The mindset is their ability to connect with players, their ability to reach the players and have that relationship that some people think old school coaches have an inability to do now. And so I think that's part of it. I think, do I think that, the misnomer that they can win is completely gone? No, it isn't, because you still hear, the conversations around this league and around this town, that Matt Rule is a quote college coach. You see certain things, or, I saw some certain calls last year and different people that I talked to that kind of know the game as well as those that maybe don't know the game, for lack of a better term, use the term when some of Joe Brady's play calls is, yeah, that may work in the SEC, but this is the National Football League. So there's still some of that, that conversation piece. But I think the other side of it is that they're skewing younger. And that's where you get guys like Sean McVay in this league, because everybody wants to skew younger because there's that supposed better or easier connection with these younger coaches, with the younger players in this league.
I can't answer that question because I didn't play college football like you did. You play for a big-time program in Penn State and Joe Paterno. I think that's a good question for you. I'm not going to answer that question because I don't know what I'm talking about. But to speak on your part about Joe Brady playing calls at the SEC compared to the NFL, I think those are just growing pains. And I think him and Matt Rule and Snow will develop next year. And I think they'll get better.
I agree. And let me make this point too, because I did get a separate submission for today's topic. And the question was, we already addressed it, but I just want to make sure M. Kimbrough 80 understands that we did address his question, which was, is it worth it for the Panthers to add Christian McCaffrey in a deal for Deshaun Watson? We kind of went over that earlier in the show, but I wanted to acknowledge him because he did send that submission in. So that part all cleared up. But yeah, I mean, I think, you start to look at, where we're going and where the coaching concept and construct comes in, you look at Urban Meyer and you've got a bunch of guys that continue to sing his praises that played for him at different stops in his college career. And then he goes to the National Football League. And look, if there's a time where he's going to be successful or a college coach can be successful, Urban Meyer is arguably one of the greatest that we've seen. He's definitely one of the most successful in his time in college football as a head coach. And to add to that, he goes to a team in Jacksonville at the time that's starving to win. They have the number 1 pick in the draft. They have a ton of cap space. And they have a brand new coach that they're allowing to run it his way. So while it was tone deaf to try to hire Doyle as his strength and conditioning coach to fix that problem, it was super tone deaf. But the reality is they look at the situation with Urban Meyer now as he takes over. And so for them right now, it's looking at the glass half full and saying, we've got a young coach who we know has had success everywhere he's been. We expect him to have success here. We got the draft capital and the salary cap space to make it all come together in 2021 and the next 3 or 4 years. So I will say this. If he gets fired because he struggles in 2.5 years, I think you're going to see the trend continue to go back in the other direction. If he has a ton of success, I think you're going to see more people go hire younger college coaches.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. That's going to do it for our second episode of Crown Score. I missed John this week.
I love that dude.
Yeah,
and for the audience, the first time I ever really interacted with John was when we kind of decided we were going to do this and we planned this. But I love his perspective. I love his information. Shout out to him. I hope he feels better next week. And he can jump back on with us because he's fun to talk to.
Yeah, rest up, John. We need you back next week. We'll see you then.